So I want to start this panel. We're going to be talking about MRV, which is monitoring, reporting, and verification for ocean CDR. My name is Alicia Karspek. I'm going to be the moderator for this panel. And I actually hold two hats right now, working at two different NGOs. I'm the director of Earth Information Programs at an NGO called Silver Lining, and we work on bringing funding into research for solar climate intervention. And I'm also a co-founder of Seaworthy, which is a new organization devoted to building the computational infrastructure for MRV in an open source framework. So I'm so glad that we're here with this fantastic panel to talk about a discussion of technical and conceptual challenges and solution for verifying ocean-based carbon uptakes. So I wanted just to start with this basic premise that we sort of all, I think, operate under, that quantification is really a requirement to have a functional CDR industry. And most of us here, maybe not all, believe that having a healthy and thriving CDR industry is really core to being able to scale CDR, ocean CDR, to its potential. And we also think that quantification is necessary, really necessary, to ensure that CDR is an effective and safe climate solution. And of course, this is something that's very near and dear to most of our hearts here. That's why we're here, to really ensure that when we think about ocean CDR, this is something that's really making a difference in terms of removing carbon from the atmosphere. So this is really what monitoring, reporting, and verification is all about. We often hear this acronym MRV. Sometimes people refer to it as measuring, reporting, and verification. I like to think of it as generally about quantifying various aspects of the ocean carbon dioxide problem. So just to talk about some basic questions that we can think about when we talk about MRV. The basic question of what is the net CO2 removal from the atmosphere that an ocean CDR deployment could produce? So this is such an important and basic question when we think about trying to sell credits, for example, into the carbon markets, right? How durable will that removal be? How long will it take for that to happen? How certain are we of those numbers? And is there potential for ocean health and ecosystem impacts, right? So these are all some of the questions that we think about when we think about MRV. So now going back to this panel, hold on a second. Can you guys bring Jamie up? So we pulled together really a wonderful panel of folks to talk about this problem and some of the challenges and some of the opportunities. And in forming this panel, we were trying to bring together a group of scientific experts who are expert in observations, also in modeling, folks who work in the private industry, the burgeoning private industry, and also in the venture capital space and in the carbon market policy space. So let me just go right to doing introductions to each of our speakers. I'm going to start with Dr. Matt Long. He's over here. There he is. So Matt is a scientist in the oceanography section of the Climate and Global Dynamics Laboratory at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And he's also co-founder of the nonprofit research organization Seaworthy, same as me. Matt's research focuses on ocean biogeochemistry, marine ecosystems, and Earth system modeling. At Seaworthy, he's leading an effort to build modeling and data infrastructure necessary to support robust monitoring and verification of the ocean carbon dioxide removal technologies. Wonderful. And next to him is Dr. Will Burt. Will, that's Will. Will leads the ocean science team at Halifax-based Planetary Technologies and is the lead author of Planetary's recently published MRV framework, which is still open for public comment if you're interested. Will's role at Planetary is to direct the scientific progress for the Planetary's lab and field-based experimentation, while also helping to advance academic-led research alongside various project investigators. As a primary research partner on multiple OAE-focused projects led by Dalhousie University, he was recently appointed as an adjunct professor at Dalhousie's Department of Oceanography. And then we have Freya Shea over there. Freya Shea is a program manager at Carbon Plan. Carbon Plan is a nonprofit research organization that works to support transparency and scientific integrity of climate solutions, with a particular focus on carbon markets and carbon removal. Freya leads carbon markets work on carbon removal, including the development and maintenance of the CDR verification framework. And she has really become a leading voice on the opportunities and challenges of relying on the carbon markets to power the growth of the ocean CDR industry. And we have Dr. David Keller. David's a senior research scientist in the Marine Biogeochemical Modeling Department at Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Kiel, Germany. And his research expertise includes assessing the potential for ocean carbon dioxide removal approaches, understanding feedbacks between biogeochemical cycles and the climate, and investigating interactions between marine ecosystems and biogeochemical cycles. David currently leads the EU Horizon 2020 project called OceanNet, which investigates ocean-based negative emissions technology. He co-leads the Ocean Carbon Dioxide Removal Intercomparison Project and is a PI in multiple other projects on ocean-based CDR. Wonderful. And of course, we have Dr. Julie Pullen, who spoke to us this morning as part of the plenary. And I'll just repeat her bio. Julie is an oceanographer and a meteorologist working on climate resilience and climate solutions. And her expertise spans climate, weather, and water, with a particular focus on Earth system modeling, and observations. She is currently an ocean climate tech investor, where she is partner and chief scientist with Propeller Ventures, and was previously a climate strategist and director of product with Jupiter Intelligence. Her and I worked there together, an early climate risk analytics startup. Prior to that, Julie was an ocean engineering professor at Stevens Institute of Technology. She currently serves on the US government's National Climate Security Roundtable and Global Association of Risk Professionals, which is GARP, Advisory Committee for Sustainable and Climate Risk. And then, of course, we have joining us remotely Dr. Jamie Palter. Jamie is an associate professor of oceanography at the University of Rhode Island's Graduate School of Oceanography. She studies ocean circulation and biogeochemistry, focusing on the transport of heat, carbon, and oxygen through the ocean and across the air-sea interface. To do this, she collects observations with moored and autonomous platforms, including sail drones and sea gliders, and combines them with the vast archives of historical ocean hydrographic and satellite data. She has recently become involved in the scientific assessment of marine carbon dioxide removal through enhancing ocean alkalinity, which has led her to pursue projects at smaller scales closer to the coastline. So that's our group. Thank you for being here all. And the format of this panel is going to be about 20 minutes of questions that I'm going to be posing to this panel. And we hope that it's going to be a relatively energetic exchange. I'm sure it will be. I'll call on you guys individually if nothing else happens. And then we're going to open it up to the audience for about 20 minutes of Q&A. If there are burning questions that happen for the audience during the session with the panelists, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you anyway. So let's just get started. I want to start with this sort of basic question that sort of forms the foundation of this panel, which is, what do you believe are the biggest conceptual and technical challenges in ocean CDR MRV? And I want to start by just putting this question to Matt. Go ahead, Matt.
Okay, thanks, Alicia, and thanks for everybody being here late in the day. One of the things that we've recognized and has been a founding principle of Seaworthy is that the ocean is a highly complex ecosystem. It's a turbulent geophysical fluid that is in constant motion and comprises elements of the biological system that can generate feedback to perturbations that are not always easily predicted. I think our primary thesis is that we really need to use all the scientific tools that we have available to bring to bear on verifying CDR deployments. And so that really entails coupling theory-based numerical models with observations that enable us to kind of pin down best available guesses or estimates of efficacy. So the approach that we're interested in taking really is at Seaworthy to focus on numerical models and the associated infrastructure necessary to support the ease of deployment of those models in direct application to support CDR deployments, and then through partnerships explore observational arrays that can be used in concert with those models to address the questions. It's really critical to note that as good scientists, we need to focus both on developing sort of our central tendency estimates of efficacy, but also pay attention to quantifying uncertainty and to ensure that uncertainty quantification is built in as a fundamental component of whatever we do. And that makes a lot of sense both from a scientific perspective, but also markets are tuned to be able to incorporate uncertainty information into value structures.
Will, did you want to add anything?
Sorry. Yeah, uncertainty. More of that. That sounds good. One of the challenges that we have conceptually and technically is this idea of balancing measurability with responsibility. So we have to start slow, start small. That's what the communities want us to do. That's what we should do. That ultimately means we will suffer from a challenge of measuring things. The ocean is a challenging place to do measurements. So that's one challenge that we face. Another one is, from my perspective, trying to develop a monitoring, so an M of the MRV that is good enough, right? So what does good enough mean? Those people who know me know that I sort of reach out in desperation to my academic peers to try and get some assistance on what that means. But you know, this is uncharted territory, so we have to develop an MRV that we can afford, that we can pull off and replicate. But it has to be good enough. It has to be scientifically robust. So those are two.
Thank you. Freya, was there anything you wanted to add about that?
Yeah, I'll add a couple. Maybe building off of your point, Will, about what is good enough. I think good enough is tremendously contextual. So if we're talking about marine CDR in the context of a compliance program that says that regulated polluters have to compensate for ongoing emissions with carbon removal, we might need to have a very different level of certainty around the tons produced than if we're talking about a public procurement program where we're not trying to make compensation claims, but we're trying to get an estimate of how much extra good stuff we are paying for. So I think what MRV needs to tell us is contextual on how we are talking about and wanting to use marine CDR. I think the second kind of high-level conceptual challenge I would add is that marine CDR MRV is going to need to be conceptually consistent both within different marine CDR approaches and across the range of long-duration CDR approaches. So what kind of accounting frameworks and standards do we need to make that true? We don't have them yet. A third is really about how marine CDR will relate to the existing carbon markets. Voluntary carbon markets exist. For the most part, they do not include standards for marine CDR or long duration CDR in general. They are fraught with both scientific and governance challenges. I think big questions about what kinds of institutions we will develop in relation or in addition to the existing carbon markets to account for this stuff.
Thanks, Freya. So there are a lot of big challenges there. And the next question is, and I'm going to pose this directly to Jamie. Can you guys bring Jamie back up? There we go. Is to talk a bit about what are some of the most effective or promising approaches for monitoring and quantifying ocean carbon uptakes.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Thanks for accommodating my virtual appearance, though I'm really wish I were there with you all, having big FOMO right now. I would say that in terms of promising approaches, I think one thing that's important to address right up front is how different those promising approaches to MRV will be depending on the strategy used to remove the carbon. So I think biotic approaches that aim to fertilize the ocean or produce macro or micro algae and sink it to the deep ocean, we'll have a set of requirements that not only looks at whether the biological carbon pump was enhanced, but how deep the enhanced carbon penetrated in the deep ocean and how to assess the durability of how long it will likely stay removed from the fast carbon cycling with the atmosphere. Whereas something like ocean alkalinity enhancement, once you've moved, if you can prove that you've moved carbon into the bicarbonate or carbonate pools, you can essentially assume that that's a permanent change on thousands of years. And so the way we assess efficacy and durability really depends on the approach that people are using in this to this problem. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jamie. David, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would add to that. And I think I've heard it several times today that it's not just ocean observing, it's modeling as well. So there's a combination of tools that need to be used. And these really are tools that we have and need. From a modeling perspective, which is where I can speak best as a modeler, it's not going to be just one model. You're probably going to need a hierarchy of models that have different capabilities. You'll need regional modeling. You may need some Earth system modeling. So you'll need different tools, and you'll have to select, of course, the right tool for the right job and make sure that it's good enough. The question is, are our current models appropriate for all of this? We may need to develop new models. Some models simply were not designed to do MRV or to work in conjunction with observation systems as we would like, or there's going to be new observing systems, and then of course the models have to be modified to account for that. And of course, I think it's been said for some other things that some of these approaches are going to be very specific in terms of how they work, and then you need to make sure you have the components that match up with how that technology works. But I think it's a bit difficult now as everything is still immature, and if you don't know exactly how you're going to do the CDR, then how you monitor it still has some challenges, because you have to first know how you're going to add or remove carbon before you can use a model to do that.
So David, just going off script for a second here. So, when you think about the model developments that are needed in order to bring models into alignment with what's needed by the industry for this, where do you think that could best be done? Academics, within the private sector, and what are some of the challenges in that?
It's going to have to be both. It's going to have to be academics are certainly doing a lot of model development now, but they're going to have to work together with the private sector, because the private sector is actually doing the CDR and knows how it works, and they need to talk to the modelers. I mean, there will be, of course, people hired from both and working on both, but I think it has to be working together to really do this and potentially developing new tools that are efficient. Of course, the models we have now are if they're designed to look at the whole Earth system, maybe you don't need that to do MRV for a certain technology at a certain scale.
Matt, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's important to set our intentions on what I've been thinking about is sort of the next 5 to 10 years of effort, and really that is geared towards setting the trajectory for the ocean CDR industry to grow in a way that is responsible and effective at mitigating climate change. And so I think if we think about that as an evolutionary process, some of the critical elements in that space are field trials and other sorts of experiments where we can demonstrate consistency between the observations we collect associated with particular perturbations and the model simulations that we conduct. And we can, in such a way, climb a spiral staircase by demonstrating consistency and credibility of our models, and then over time build towards sort of scalable approaches for MRV to function, in a CDR industry that is actually making substantive contributions to mitigating the climate crisis. I think it's really important to focus on that idea of setting the trajectory, and that entails both building the tools, but also the social and technological networks, that sustain those tools and will make them grow and adapt as knowledge and science continues to evolve.
Thanks, Matt. So I want to turn another question over to Jamie, if she could come back up. So for those of you in the room who are unaware of this, there does tend to be a little bit of tension in the scientific community between modelers and observationalists. And I have seen some of that play out in this question of whether doing MRV for MCDR is primarily an observational problem or primarily a modeling problem or both. And so I wanted just to open up that question to our panelists. And I want to start with Jamie, who is an observationalist, and to hear her view on the relative roles of models and observations in this problem.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I think that if there is tension in the community, I don't think there should be. And I think this is firmly a answer of both, that we definitely need observations and models, and they need to talk to each other. So I think one thing that's really clear is that the ocean is huge and turbulent, and the perturbations we hope to do are going to be small enough to not, I think that we hope that they'll be big enough to make a difference, but small enough not to do any harm, right? And so we're looking at things that are going to be dispersed and pretty much impossible to measure by the techniques we have available today and those that we foresee in the near future. So in that sense, the models are going to be really important because they can track to machine precision any perturbation there is. And yet we can't just put our faith in models without validating them with observations. And so I think what David said was really spot on, that we need models that are kind of fit for purpose, in the sense that some models are not the right tool for this job, but there will be models that are validated and that we can build confidence in. And but that doesn't mean we shift away from the observations. The combination of the best models and the best observations through techniques that are constantly evolving of data assimilation, there'll be artificial intelligence methods. We're going to evolve this whole suite of solutions, and I hope in lockstep, so that models inform where the best places to do MCDR are. Observations can see if what the models predicted was correct, and then help modelers fix any problems, and go in a cycle like that till we figure things out. Thanks.
Thanks, Jamie. Freya, I want to put you a little bit on the spot to ask this question from the perspective of carbon markets, and whether or not folks who are involved in purchasing credits they feel the same way about being able to put some of their faith in models.
Great question. I think Matt said early on, he mentioned the importance of ingesting uncertainty into our characterization of what actually happened. And I think that is really critical in carbon markets. I think you see leading buyers, Frontier, Shopify, Microsoft, who are looking at long duration CDR, saying, hey, we are open to supporting approaches to CDR for which we have existing scientific uncertainty, as long as we can clearly quantify that uncertainty, bound it, and incorporate it into our articulation of what we bought. I think in a broader, kind of less educated suite of buyers, there is more fear around what people are calling open systems, so systems where you can't just meter the CO2 that you're sticking underground, but rather you are interacting with some biogeochemical cycle in a way that amplifies carbon drawdown. I think that there's a learning curve there to building comfort with modeling, with quantification of uncertainty, and with incorporating that uncertainty into a concept of tons.
Does anybody else want to take that? Okay.
Maybe can I add one thing on the last?
Please.
I think the conversation around modeling also makes me think about capacity and where we have capacity in the system to do this kind of work. Yeah. One concept that I return to often in MRV is the difference between things that we should perceive as project responsibilities, like that deployment, that company should figure this out, versus system responsibilities, which is we collectively need a tool, a suite of tools, the scientific basis for understanding X part of the system. And I think for a lot of these large modeling efforts, in my mind, they are system responsibilities to do well, such that many, many different projects can use those tools consistently across deployments. And I think there are major and very interesting questions about how we support system efforts in marine CDR MRV.
Excellent, thank you. So let me shift a little bit here and talk a bit about some of the challenges that private companies may be facing specifically around MRV. And I want to open it up from Julie. Julie, with your hat on as someone who's in the venture capital space and can speak broadly about what challenges companies are facing.
Yeah, thank you for that. So Matt Eisman in the previous panel mentioned the importance of transparency in MRV. And I think there's the potential for fragmentation when, in the absence of accepted, readily available MRV approaches, that companies will undertake that portion of the value chain themselves. I think that has the potential to just be at odds with some of the sentiments and the way that the markets perhaps have the potential to unfold. So I wanted to raise that as a potential challenge. It's undeniable that there'll be a need for certain companies to really be able to make adjustments in their processes and do their own version of MRV, but it's a separate thing to think about how does that translate into the actual accreditation process, and are those MRV approaches that the companies are developing and fielding, are those internal, potentially proprietary ones that they're just going to use as part of their improvements in getting better, or are they going to be extending those to take on more of the accreditation value chain? And I think that's an open question. I'd be interested in hearing other people's thoughts on that.
Will, would you like to?
Yeah, so at Planetary, we don't have any challenges. Yeah, it's a long list. I think that probably one of the biggest challenges if you're going to lump a bunch together is just a sort of a lack of precedent. Like, we are charging into this, into this new space as trailblazers, not just us, but other companies as well. And there is fear amongst communities because there's so much unknown. There's uncertainty amongst the scientific community because there's not a lot of peer-reviewed literature out there to back up the science that a lot of people in this room believe to be true, but we need to be able to back that up. I've actually heard some really great ideas today about how we can accelerate some of the academic spaces to help us there. And then, yeah, the industries, I think at the moment we aren't working well enough together. I want to give a shout out to Mallory at EB. She's starting to try to bring the MRV minds together, and we can and should do that. But so yeah, there's a lot of challenges out there, and I think that academic partnerships, and you're going to get really tired of me saying this because I'm on the next panel too, surprise, surprise. Those are going to be super critical to closing those gaps. So I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah. Does anyone want to take the question of cost? So how expensive is it to do MRV when you think about the computing expense, the observational expense, and how are you dealing with that as a small starting company?
I feel like I'm the only one here who's going to answer that. It's really expensive. What I mentioned before about monitoring, I wasn't talking so much about the modeling component, but there is a computational cost there. But yes, I'm not sure how many observationalists are in the room, but ocean observations are really expensive. And again, it's going to come back to this ability to partner with academic groups who have the capabilities. But as I've learned sort of the hard way, that's only going to work if the funding is in place. Turns out those academics aren't just going to come and help me out because I'm a nice person. So we need those are all structures that we need in place because, yeah, fundamentally the cost at this stage, at this early stage, is even that much higher because the bar we need to clear for safety is really high. We need to sort of over-demonstrate safety. The regulatory agencies that are in place, what they are sort of asking for isn't probably in line with what the community wants. So we have to go above and beyond what those regulators are asking for. And that just requires more samples, more analysis, more cost.
So one of the themes that you have just brought up in your earlier response is around this need for having these connections between industry and academia, and more generally scientific research, especially as research is still progressing. So I wanted to open this up to all of us, is to think about, and your thoughts on what are the best mechanisms to ensure that there continues to be this close relationship between the science and as it evolves and the private sector, and how they're using that to do the best possible MRV.
So I'll pass it off, but I
Okay.
just want to say that the work we're doing in Halifax, it's a very big team now, and I think that is a great example of how it can work. And I'll pass it on.
So I think I can make a small comment on that from the European perspective, where I think there's been some successful examples where there's European Union funding. They fund science, but they don't fund just science for academics. They actually put out calls where they say industry is welcome to join. And industry partners do partner in these large consortium-based projects. And that's allowed and encouraged in these projects. And I think that's one way to help move this forward, is if there's funding calls that says industry is welcome to come and play and work together. I think that's been a very successful example in the EU of how this can work. But of course, it requires the funder to actually want to do this.
One perspective I have on this relates to the infrastructure necessary to support verification, through sort of a model-centric view. And the idea that sort of a community-oriented process is really needed, which is to say that there's, economies of scale can be achieved by trying to build modeling systems of interoperable components such that, you can harness innovation, maybe in the biogeochemical model component, and use that innovation across a set of physical models that enable a diverse community of people to address these problems with as limited as possible duplication of effort or continually reinventing the wheel. There's a tension there with respect to ensuring sufficient diversity of approaches and mitigating epistemic risk that can, that arises in the context of myopia, just looking at one system. But I think that we need to be able to navigate that tension, and an appropriate way to navigate that tension really is to address some of the technical challenges that arise in the context of the work that ocean modelers do. Many cases, computational scientists spend order 80% of their time wrangling data, not dealing with the conceptual flow of the ideas underpinning the science. And so that, this problem fits squarely into that context. Collectively addressing some of those problems for specific CDR use cases is an important step to remove that kind of bottleneck from the system. And I think that is, to speak to Julie's point, instantiating a community-oriented process has a lot of benefits in the context of transparency and ensuring the continued validity of the approaches that we take.
Freya, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, maybe I would add, I'd be also curious for your thoughts on this, but one thing I've been thinking about is the pernicious cycle that starts if CDR companies are building a business moat using MRV and learnings from their deployments. Somehow we need to figure out how to, in my mind, build the CDR businesses that are about winning on logistics while leaving the science in the realm of the public, such that scientists can be collaborating and picking up on it and advancing it. Everyone else can be using it. We are not talking about a small pie here. We need a lot of people playing. So how we free up the learnings from real deployments, I think, is integral to how scientists will be able to participate, collaborate, and move the whole field forward.
Right. And of course, there are companies who are going to potentially specialize in doing MRV. And I actually wanted to hear from you, Julie, about how you feel about those companies, not anyone specific, but in general, private companies taking on this role of doing MRV.
I think that opens up the potential to go much faster. to really learn from deployments and improve the technologies. And I think it's positive development. And I look to see more that have these type of deep collaborations with academic institutions, and mechanisms and vehicles like additional ventures where they're encouraging close partnership across these different realms, and we'll hear from them tomorrow. I think that's a really powerful way to move forward together.
Okay, so let me move on to just our last question before we open it up to the audience, and this is about the role that the government potentially plays within MRV. And some examples of the roles that government could play would be as regulators, as funding agencies for things like open calls about MRV, providers of backbone observing networks, and what more about private and philanthropic sectors. So basically the question of who best plays this role of MRV. Is it the companies? Is it the government? Is it philanthropy?
I'll start on this, but I'll start by saying I don't have the best answer for this on who is actually going to be that. But I think there's some critical issues that have to be addressed here that have been raised by a number of the other panelists. It's on transparency and conflict of interest when doing MRV. I know a lot of the companies now are developing the MRV, but of course they're going to have a conflict of interest if they're being paid for those carbon credits. So there does probably need to be some independent regulator, whether that's government or some other type of organization, that can do the accreditation in an open and transparent manner to avoid any conflict of interest. I think that's really important to do.
Priya, how has this played out in the terrestrial markets? Any thoughts from that?
Yeah, one lesson perhaps to take from existing markets, largely around things like forests and soils, is the porosity between private sector standards and public standards. So one example is in the California Cap and Trade Program, which is kind of the flagship regulation to limit pollution, CO2 pollution. Polluters can use carbon offsets that have been approved by the California regulator, the CARB, or the California Air Resources Board. Those set of standards were pretty much completely developed in the private sector and basically rubber stamped by the regulator. And that is not a one-off instance. I think you see that porosity where protocols, standards are prototyped in the private sector and then slurped up into the public sector. And I think for me, the lesson there is like, wow, what's happening right now with the front edge of private sector MRV protocol development and standards around purchasing are actually probably pretty important, not only for how the private sector unfolds, but probably also for how the public sector will think about MRV. Yeah, and maybe I would add, there are so many different roles that the government could play in the system, and we just don't know yet. But it will take, we're talking about such a broad range of CDR approaches, both within ocean, marine CDR, and across, direct air capture, biomass-based approaches, et cetera. One critical thing to keep in mind and ask questions about is administrative capacity when we're talking or hoping for standard setting coming out of something like the federal government.
I'd just like to reiterate the point I made earlier about our task now really is to set the trajectory for the growth of the ocean CDR industry. And I think we're fortunate in that the community is relatively small at present and contains, in my view, primarily people who are acting in good faith and trying to do the right thing and are open to transparency. That situation may change over the next few years as more, as the diversity and just the demographics, the growth of the community changes. I think it's really important that this idea of transparency be something that is touted as fundamental, and that the academic community is a key bottleneck in sanctioning MRV approaches. That for the CDR industry to move forward without buy-in from the research community will imply that we're not based on sound science. And so I think a really important goal for us as a community, for the research community, is to engage in these issues and vet, the MRV protocols that are beginning to be established, because as Freya points out, MRV protocols are likely to become de facto standards over time.
So I want to give the last word to Jamie. She could come up here to talk about the importance of the observational backbone networks that are funded through the government and potentially the role that those are going to play within MRV. Can you guys bring Jamie up?
Am I up?
You're up.
Okay. Thanks for that. I think that everything that people have said is totally spot on. I totally agree about the varied roles of government and the two-way feedbacks. The thing I can speak to with some experience is that, like Will said, oceanographic research is really expensive. And at least in the US and in some other countries, we have an observational backbone that includes lots of assets, especially our research vessels, the UNO's research vessels. Those are going to be instrumental for continuing in basic research, but they can now have a use in this applied space of MCDR. And so we should, and one benefit of that, playing on what Freya said and everyone reiterating the transparency, is that when you engage with federally funded science through UNOLG's National Science Foundation, they usually stipulate that your data is transparent. You have a data management plan. Everything has to be released, and more that includes all your software and codes and all of that. So I think that's a real benefit when we start using these partnerships and using the government-backed observational backbone that includes the research vessels, but is not limited to that. We have the Argo program, which was referenced this morning, and just, lots of OOI, the ocean observing observatories, and Ocean Network Canada. And so we have lots of resources that can play a big role in our MRV for great benefit to the whole enterprise.
Great, thanks, Jamie. So with that, I want to open it up to questions from the audience. I see some hands, but maybe you could come up to the mic and just go ahead and introduce yourself and direct your question to anyone individually or to the group as a whole.
All right, so this is more of a comment, but any response is welcome. My name is Meg Chadsey, and I'm with Washington Sea Grant, which kind of gives away what I'm about to say. I'm recycling a comment I wanted to make at the end of the last panel, but fortunately I think it's also appropriate here. Both the prior panel and you folks are calling for better cooperation between science and industry, and sometimes government too. And you're all busy people. And one of the missing elements that I think could facilitate better collaboration is something that we at Sea Grant call the Sea Grant glue. I would be willing to bet that most people in the room are like, what's Sea Grant? And so my second floor elevators pitch is we're basically the marine version of Ag Extension, if that's a more familiar model. We are an intermediary between academic and, in this case, NOAA science, and the public and industry, and we facilitate these relationships, and we're a relatively neutral, perceived as neutral convener. We are trusted in communities, especially coastal communities, and so when you have these really knotty problems and you need people to reach across, bridge, and early on speak with community members and get that dialogue going too, to support or to build support for piloting projects or to help communities understand what MRV means and whether they should trust it, that's a role that Sea Grant can play. And my lunch companion is a former director of my program, so she's like, well, it should be Sea Grant doing this. And I agree, except that I came up in a recent meeting with a new name. It would be Sea Grant with a capital C for carbon, so we could be cool like all you startups with catchy names. Maybe we need a third program in the US or maybe Canada, but that's just my comment. And there's other folks in here that have Sea Grant blood in their veins, and so I hope that they resonates with them. Thanks.
Thank you. I mean, any comments about Sea Grant or just in general about third-party sort of nonprofit organizations playing this cohesive role?
I don't have very much to say except for saying yes. Like, we need facilitation, we need spaces where people can come together. I think CDR community in general needs a lot of help with community engagement. That is a skill set that does not fall out of business, does not fall out of science. Like, it is its own skill set. And figuring out where the community as a whole will get support on meaningful community engagement, I think is really important.
I'll just say one thing that has been a founding principle of Seaworthy, which is really to sort of recognize that there's kind of a gap in the research government landscape that is hard to fill on specifically on problems that emerge rapidly. And so CDR is one of these things that has been kind of at a slow simmer in the background for a number of years, but over just even the last 6 months, interest has grown substantially. And you know, our thesis is that there really needs to be a targeted investment in some of the infrastructure and conceptual framing to support CDR or support MRV, and that needs to be a community-oriented process. But you know, the government entities that might play a role ultimately in sustaining an MRV framework are insufficiently nimble to tackle the problem you know, with gusto. You know, in real time with sufficient rapidity. And academia has incentive structures that, to an extent, preclude, you know, the deep slog through technical problems that don't necessarily yield publications on a rapid basis. And so there's that sort of gap is a founding principle for us, you know, to incorporate a nonprofit entity to do research in a community-oriented fashion, to address this problem, and to kind of operate, you know, like a startup company, but with a nonprofit research bent.
Thanks, Matt. Looks like we have another question.
Hi, my name is Akash Rastogi. I'm from Canada's Oceanfront Institute. It's not a question directed at any one particular panelist. It's open to anyone who wants to respond. But my question is, if you fast track 7-10 years from now, where hopefully MCDR is more mature, what do you see as the role of modeling? I understand we need modeling right now because observations are expensive and operationally hard to do. But I personally feel very cautious about reliance on models. There are a lot of industries where there has become an over-reliance on models over time. That's just human behavior. We start relying on things. And that has not ended well. Like, we don't have to go far. 2008 financial crisis is a simple example. Our models were based on how to price liquidity and counterparty credit risk, and the whole industry believed in it until we saw they don't work. And so I'm curious, where do you see the role of models 7-10 years from now? And if we are going to be living with models, how do we not make the same mistakes?
Yeah.
Well, I think one good piece of news for you, I think, is that the communities we work in aren't going to tolerate just leaving the observations aside. We've talked about how the observations will feed the models and improve the models, and it'll be an iterative process, and that'll be great. But we will never be able to go too far towards the modeling world. Now, the scalability problem, that is going to be a thing. We are going to have to rely heavily on models. It's just the reality. But I know from firsthand experience, you know, the observation frameworks we put forth in these communities are going to have to we're going to have to commit to them in the long term, and they're going to have to be robust. So don't you worry, the observations aren't going anywhere.
I could just add to that I think, you know, it's unlikely for us to arrive at a place 5 to 7 years from now where we can just sort of say, okay, we're done. We solved this problem. Now we can, you know, move forward with the models we have. Rather, there needs to be sort of the development of a field that provides stewardship over this industry to an extent, and continues to improve the models and continues to make investments in the fundamental science necessary to ensure that those models are credible. And so, you know, a barrier to entry right now is credible models, and we need, as a community, to define what credibility, what comprises credibility. I think that there's also sort of a flip side to that equation, in that over time, running fully explicit three-dimensional general circulation models with explicit biogeochemistry is not a scalable approach, because they're just computationally intensive. And so, while we need to continue to evolve the science, we also need to develop numerical shortcuts that enable us to provide robust MRV at scale. So I think that those two things imply sustained effort in this space.
Maybe I'd just add a vague thought about the importance of the institutional structures we design to maintain and bless these models, and how financial incentives in subtle ways can influence our willingness to look critically at them over time.
One more short comment. The models have to be open and transparent. You have to be able to download the model code and look at them. I know they're very complicated, so not everybody can do that, but hopefully the academic community will provide a check and say, look, your model's no good, but it has to be open and transparent. The models, the data, the forcing that's input into them, everything has to be open.
Were there any more? Oh, go ahead, Kim.
I'm Kim Gilbert from the OAE R&D program, and I'm worried about the data. We're funding a lot of research, generating a lot of data, and frankly, I loathe the idea of modelers spending a lot of time trying to pull data out of Excel files and figure out how to ingest it. So I'd like to propose that we start thinking about a common data standard, a common way of storing the data with naming conventions and units and file locations, maybe a protocol. My question to you is that happening and I'm missing it? If not, who should do it? How should it come about?
So I want to direct that question to Jamie, because this is something that, of course, the academic community of folks who work in observations. Could you bring Jamie back up? Yeah.
Okay.
Did you hear the question?
Yes, I did. I would say I think things are getting better. Like I said, a data management plan that you'd read from 10 years ago would not pass muster today. We are really getting hammered on this, but also as observationalists, we get it. Like, we can't even use the data that was produced 15 or 20 years ago ourselves, even sometimes within a group. And so we are recognizing that this is a bottleneck to progress. And so I think people are doing better trying to make machine readable formats. There's people, Ryan Abernathy has a huge effort and a startup on doing good work in this area. And I do think we're heading slowly, in the right direction, and we should accelerate that. So I agree with you. And I think that things are getting better. And also there could be some machine learning or artificial intelligence approaches. I think it might've been Julie that said it, that take unstructured data. Was that you this morning? And just let the machine deal with it, because it's a messy job. It can eat up half a PhD thesis, really getting that right. So we're moving that direction. I actually had a response, people, to the last question that I just wanted about modeling. One thing that has come up in our conversations before but wasn't addressed here is like I don't think it was the idea of probabilistic MRV. And so I think when we get an A+ on our first first N deployments in observing them, modeling them, and marrying the two, and then we see where the models have uncertainty, like what Matt was talking about with uncertainty, and then we can fold that into our future assessments so that there's like a probability of success based on what the model does well and what it doesn't do well, based on the validation from the early A+ experiments. And then later we kind of loosen the observing checks, the direct observing checks, not eliminate, but maybe reduce, and go from there and kind of create a probabilistic assessment of the MCDR achieved. So a probabilistic MRV. Thanks.
Thanks, Jamie. And I want to give the last word to David.
Just a quick comment on the standardization. Within the Earth system modeling community, this has been done a little bit for CMIP, which you may have heard, the Coupled Model Intercomparison Project. And there are standards for naming conventions and file formats, and there's even recommendations. There's OMIP for ocean model under comparison, and OCMIP for the carbon version of that, where there are some standards. And I think that works well because people want to share model data and analyze it. So that's quite useful, but it's certainly, I don't know that this has ever been done for regional models or other types of models, but I think that's a good example. It's not free though. It takes a lot of work, and it's really a pain in the butt to standardize everything from some of these models. So it is a bit of effort.
Thank you. Okay, so it's 5 o'clock, a little after 5, so I want to close out the session. Okay. Is there one more burning question? Maybe from Jessica. Is it Jessica?
Yes.
Who wants a burning question? Last one, and then happy hour, I think.
My last
No.
question for all of you
One more
is
session.
that this is all deeply ambitious. And while I'm so excited that there's a lot of work to do, oh my gosh, there's a lot of work to do. Where do you see the opportunities to help scale this community? How do we bring not just the next generation of scientists, but how do we start focusing our community on solving these problems, addressing these issues? Where is that groundswell of support coming from?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention one example. I think it was mentioned earlier about how, starting with small scale deployments means our measurement methodologies are starting small. And I think that makes a lot of sense, but the types of funding efforts like ARPA-E's to look at long range measurement to anticipate that these solutions are going to scale quickly, so that to be able to anticipate the needs to measure across large scales. I think that's a really good example of like getting the innovation focused on what the challenges will be down the line, so that the technology is there hopefully to meet that challenge. Oh, and the ARPA-E call is tens of millions of dollars. So, these are huge
45,
opportunities for people.
I can hop in. Yeah, there are so many big calls right now that I am hearing new voices responding to in terms of federal funding. That's really exciting. In terms of unblocking community support, I think we have, if you're talking about probabilistic estimates of what carbon removal achieves, we're still talking about a lot of approaches that could intersect with zero. And I think there is some concern about just saying like, everybody, like, let's go with approaches that can still intersect with zero. I think there's a certain amount of uncertainty bounding to validate that yes, this makes sense to go all in on, will, in my mind, really unlock an upswell of participation that is directed at something that we think is worthwhile.
Just very briefly, I think the skill sets that are required to address the problems at hand are actually fairly rare. And when I try to hire a postdoc, for example, I'm often it often takes 6 months to find somebody who's suitable for the job. And I think that so there's an issue with pipelines. Just so we need to start building kind of the educational frameworks and in training a diverse, capable population of people to fill the jobs that will be available as this industry grows.
I just want to say that we can do that. We really can. You give a talk in a group of young people, young students, and they get so fired up at the prospect of a solutions-based, like coming into the climate space, working on this problem, especially the ones that are, thinking about where they're going to go out of grad school or something. I mean, it's there.
I would second that. Okay, so let's wrap up now. So, I would say this is a very thorny topic, as you can see, and I think there'll be many really interesting conversations to be had over the years about this. And I welcome anyone to come up after this and ask questions directly to the panelists. But right now, we're going to move on to the next session, which is going to be on CDR governance. So thanks for the panelists, and thank you all for sticking around.